My cafe has always smelled of cinnamon. It settled here from the very first day I decided to open this little place in Brooklyn. For me, it wasn't just work, but the fulfillment of a dream. I believed every cup of coffee could give not only energy but warmth. And cinnamon was my talisman. They say its aroma attracts love. I secretly hoped that one day this would turn out to be true. Every morning I repeated the same ritual, opening the blinds, wiping the tables, arranging muffins and croissants in the display, turning on the music. And that's when he appeared. A tall man, always in a business suit, carrying a laptop under his arm. His order never changed, black americano, no sugar. I already knew his name, Jake Morgan. I had noticed it on his card when he paid. He spoke little. A short thank you, a rare nod. Yet sometimes I thought even those few words sounded like their own kind of music. Still, he seemed distant, focused only on work. For him, coffee was fuel, not pleasure. One morning I absent-mindedly mixed up the jars. A pinch of cinnamon slipped into his americano. When I realized, it was too late. I handed him the cup, bracing myself for reproach. He took a sip, and I saw his face change. He lifted his gaze, met mine, and for the first time, smiled. Was this a mistake or a gift? Jake asked, eyes narrowing slightly. What would you prefer it to be? I answered, trying to hide my nervousness. He laughed softly. And that was the moment I felt my little cinnamon magic had truly worked. From that day, something shifted. The next morning, Jake ordered his usual americano but added, "Only with that mistake you made yesterday." I almost burst out laughing. It was his way of asking for coffee with cinnamon. For the first time, I saw him not so serious. He even stayed longer than usual. He sat by the window, opened his laptop, but instead of diving straight into work, he watched the people outside and sipped his coffee slowly. As I passed to wipe the neighboring table, I heard him murmur to himself. Completely different taste. His voice sounded warmer than I expected. I dared to joke. Careful, or you might start smiling every day. He looked up and replied. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. Those words lingered in me long after he left. For the first time, I realized he might be more than just the serious client in a suit. From then on, every time he appeared, the cafe seemed to glow differently. I began waiting for the doorbell more than I waited for orders. And every time I sprinkled a pinch of cinnamon into his coffee, my heart trembled with the feeling that this tiny detail might be the beginning of something bigger. Time passed. Jake came every day and always ordered that same coffee. Now he no longer rushed. He settled by the window and pulled out a thick sketchbook filled with drawings. I hesitated to be too curious, but one day I asked. "You're an architect, aren't you?" He looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Yes. I design buildings." "How did you guess?" "You're always sketching bridges, houses, lines. It's hard not to notice." He laughed. And that laugh was different, alive, genuine. For the first time, I saw him without his mask of restraint. He began telling me about his work, how he wanted to create spaces that brought people together, how he loved light and high ceilings. His voice carried confidence, but also tenderness, when he spoke about beauty in architecture. I listened and found myself thinking I wanted to be part of that light. Then he said, "Your cinnamon coffee has become a symbol of something new for me. Habits change when someone dares to break the rules." I didn't know what to reply. I only felt the cafe growing warmer, not from spices, but from him. My friend Laura, who helped me on weekends, noticed the change quickly. She winked. "Sara, you're in love." I waved my hands in protest. "No. He's just a customer." "Uh-huh. A customer you pick earrings for every morning? A customer who makes you wear lipstick even on Mondays?" I laughed, but I knew she was right. Waiting for Jake had become my favorite part of the day. One evening, when the cafe was nearly empty, he came to the counter and said, "May I show you something?" He opened his sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of a building with huge panoramic windows. I pictured a small cafe here. Cozy, warm. A place that smells like cinnamon. And a woman who makes every coffee special. I froze. His words touched me deeper than he probably realized. I stared at the sketch, and hope quietly bloomed inside me. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "You inspire me, Sara," he said seriously. In that moment, I knew something more than casual morning conversations was being born between us. The next morning I opened the cafe as usual. Everything was in place, the coffee machine humming, pastries in the display, flowers on the tables. Yet inside I felt nervous, as if I were going on a date. When the door opened, I saw him. Jake was holding a small bouquet of daisies. I had never imagined him with flowers, and their simplicity touched me more than any luxury gift could. "For your coffee, you need some floral company," he said, placing the bouquet on the counter. My heart leapt wildly. I placed the flowers in a tall glass right away. My face stretched into a smile, no matter how hard I tried to stay calm. That day, I made him not just americano with cinnamon. I drew a tiny heart on the foam and slid the cup toward him, silently watching. Jake looked at the heart, then at me. In his eyes, I read more than words could ever express. The other customers didn't notice the moment. But for me, it was everything. Because right then, I realized, my belief in cinnamon's magic had finally come true. After that morning with the daisies, something shifted in the air. Jake began staying longer. He could sit by the window for hours, working on his sketches, yet he always found a moment to talk with me. His seriousness started giving way to a lightness I had never seen in him before. One day he asked, "Sara, why cinnamon? Why not vanilla, or caramel?" I smiled and replied, "Because cinnamon has character. It's warm but also a little sharp. Just like life. And I believe it attracts love." He fell silent, looking at me as if trying to solve a riddle. Then he nodded. "Now I understand why I keep coming back here." His words made me blush. I turned back to the coffee machine to hide my emotions, though my heart pounded louder than the hiss of steam. That evening, as I closed the cafe, I lingered by the daisies he had given me. They were simple, but still held warmth. I thought, maybe he also believes in little signs, even if he'll never admit it aloud. Saturdays were always lively in the cafe. Families with children, students with books, freelancers with laptops. The hum of voices filled the space. And on one Saturday, Jake brought me a surprise. He placed a small box on the counter. I looked at him, puzzled. "Open it," he said. Inside was a delicate silver pendant shaped like a coffee bean, on a fine chain. Why?" I whispered. "Because coffee isn't just work for you. It's your heart. And I wanted you to have something to remind you of that." I was moved beyond words. My thoughts swirled, but no sentence felt strong enough. All I knew was that this man saw me deeper than anyone else had. That night, I wore the pendant. I never took it off again. It lay close to my heart, reminding me of him every time I poured coffee for someone else. Laura noticed and raised her eyebrows. "Sara, you're done for. This is no longer just a customer." And deep inside, I knew she was right. One rainy day, Jake arrived later than usual. His suit was damp, his hair disheveled. He looked tired, but his eyes still lit up when they met mine. "Rough day?" I asked, placing coffee before him. "Too many meetings." But I kept thinking about this moment, sitting here, smelling cinnamon. My heart skipped. He said it so sincerely I couldn't stop myself from smiling. That evening, we talked longer than ever before. He told me about his childhood in a small town, about his dream of building a bridge that would symbolize connection. "And you?" he suddenly asked. "Why did you open this cafe?" I thought a moment. Because I wanted to create a place where people feel at home. Where even strangers can find something in common. He studied me, as if my words carried more meaning than I realized. Then he said softly. Then we're the same. I build walls to unite people. You make coffee to do the same. That phrase stayed with me forever. The following week, he came with a new project. He unfolded the drawings on the table by the window and waved me over. Sara, take a look. I leaned in. It was a design for a cultural center with a cafe on the ground floor. The idea, he explained, is for people to work, connect, and feel at home. Here, he pointed, I imagined you. I froze. His words were too direct, too honest. I didn't know what to say. Yet deep inside, I felt certain, he truly pictured me as part of his future. That's incredible, Jake, I whispered. You're not just designing buildings. You're designing dreams. He looked at me so intensely that I could hardly bear his gaze. It felt as though we spoke a language no one else could understand. That night I realized, our story had already grown beyond coffee and cinnamon. It was becoming something far greater. Sometimes I feared the feeling growing inside me. It was too quick, too strong, like a tree forcing its way through concrete. Was it too soon to trust it? One morning, Jake arrived earlier than anyone. I hadn't even arranged the pastries when the bell rang. He was holding 2 coffee cups. Today I decided to surprise you, he said. My own recipe. I laughed, taking 1 cup. Inside was americano with honey. Wow, I said. So you have magic too. Maybe I learned from you. We sat together by the window, for the first time not separated by the counter. Rain trickled down the glass, but inside it was warm. I knew this moment mattered. He looked at me seriously and said, Sara, you've changed my life more than you realize. I didn't answer. I simply placed my hand on the table, and his fingers brushed mine. It was our first silent confession. After that morning when his fingers touched mine, I felt like everything had changed. It was as if my whole life up to then had been a prologue, and now the real story had begun. Every meeting with Jake filled the cafe with new meaning. I no longer thought only about business, customers, or profit. I found myself catching his gaze and realizing I wanted this man to stay in my life forever. But with warmth came fear. What if all of this was just an illusion? What if tomorrow he stopped coming? I was afraid of giving my heart away too quickly. One evening, when the cafe was emptying out, he helped me stack the chairs. It was the first time Jake stayed after closing. We stood side by side, and I felt the closeness of his shoulder. He told me he had an important presentation the next day. Sara, I'd like you to be there, he said suddenly. It matters to me. I was surprised. He, the serious architect, was inviting me into a world he normally kept closed. That invitation was proof, I wasn't just a barista sprinkling cinnamon into his coffee. That night, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. The next day, I found myself in a large hall of a business center, surrounded by dozens of people in suits. I clutched a small notebook in my hands to look busy, but in truth, my eyes were fixed only on him. Jake stood on stage, speaking confidently, his blueprints displayed on the screen. His voice was steady, but when he explained the details, his eyes shone the same way they did in my cafe. I felt proud, as if he were already part of me. Then suddenly, he looked into the crowd, found me, and said, In every project, I search for something human. Warmth. Like in a cup of cinnamon coffee someone once made for me by accident. Accidents sometimes become the beginnings of the most important things. The audience smiled. My cheeks burned. He had just told our story in front of dozens of strangers. And at the same time, he confessed that I mattered to him. After the presentation, he approached me and said simply, Thank you for being here. It meant everything. In that moment, I knew he hadn't just invited me randomly. He wanted me to be part of his victories, and his life. That evening, we walked through the streets of Manhattan. The sky was dark, the city alive with lights. Jake walked beside me slowly, for once without a laptop or papers in his hands. His hands were free, and somehow that felt symbolic. I used to forget to live, he said. I had only projects, deadlines, goals. But now I wait for mornings, just to come to you. I stopped, looking at him. Are you sure this isn't just a new habit? He smiled and answered. Habits don't change your life. People do. My heart clenched. At that moment, I realized we were both moving towards something real. We strolled down Broadway, laughing at street performers, buying roasted chestnuts from a vendor, and sharing them straight from the paper bag. It was such a simple evening, yet I felt it was more important than any formal event. Because here, amidst the noise and lights, we were no longer the architect and the barista. We were simply Jake and Sara. Our relationship grew so naturally that I sometimes wondered, how did this all happen? Just months ago, he was only a customer in a suit. And now, he was the man whose footsteps I imagined even in my dreams. One evening, as I was locking up, he offered. May I walk you home? We strolled through the narrow Brooklyn streets, and I told him stories about my neighbors, about the shops where I knew every owner. He listened attentively, as though these simple details were treasures from a world new to him. When we reached my building, he paused. His gaze lingered on me, and silence stretched between us. Then he leaned closer, brushing his lips against mine. Our first kiss, gentle, hesitant, but so true that the entire world seemed to vanish. I entered my apartment with a heart pounding like a drum. And I knew, my life would never be the same again. The next day, he came early once more. I prepared his coffee, and he pulled an envelope from his bag. This is for you, he said. Inside was a ticket to a classical music concert. I didn't know if you liked this, he admitted, but I thought it might be something worth sharing together. I was touched. He, the man once consumed only by work, was now searching for ways to spend time with me. I realized this wasn't coincidence anymore. It was intention. That evening, we sat in the concert hall, listening to the orchestra. The music swelled, filling the space. Jake's hand brushed mine and stayed there until the last note faded. Afterward, we walked through the city. Suddenly he said, Sara, I never thought a small accident with cinnamon could change my life. But now I know, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I leaned into him, too moved to speak. Sometimes words are unnecessary. After the concert, the invisible barrier between us seemed to disappear. Jake became part of my daily life. He would stop by not only in the mornings but also in the evenings, sometimes helping me close the café. I laughed watching him carry pastry boxes or rearrange chairs. He, the serious architect, now my partner in these small rituals. One night, as we stacked stools together, I asked, Why do you really come here, Jake? He hesitated, then said, Because here, I can be myself. Not the architect everyone expects things from. Just Jake. His words touched me more deeply than any compliment could. Trust, real trust, was blooming between us. Later, when I locked the doors, I paused for a moment, taking in the lingering smell of cinnamon. Maybe my cafe really did have a kind of magic. It had given me more than a dream, it had given me a man who made my heart feel alive. Weekends became ours. Jake showed me places he loved in New York, old libraries, hidden gardens, bridges with sweeping views. He saw the city as an architect, with reverence for details, for structure, for light. I saw him, and in his laughter and gentle touch, I began to see a new world of my own. One afternoon, we sat on a bench by the river. The wind carried the scent of water and asphalt. He pulled out his sketchbook and quickly drew a building with wide windows. Here, he said, I see our cafe. Not small anymore, but spacious, filled with light and people. I laughed. Are you already planning my future? No, he replied confidently. Our future. I went quiet. His words landed with a certainty that took my breath away. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. With him, everything felt possible. One Monday, he didn't show up. Each time the bell above the door rang, I looked up, expecting him, but it was always someone else. The day dragged endlessly. I hadn't realized until then how much I had come to depend on his presence. The next morning, he finally came. He looked exhausted, with shadows under his eyes. I rushed over. Jake, what happened? Tough week, he sighed. I barely slept. But I had to come here. Because this is where I feel peace. I placed his coffee before him and sat down beside him. We didn't speak much. Instead, he reached for my hand, holding it tightly. Sara, you're my anchor, he whispered. That phrase engraved itself on my heart. For the first time, I realized he needed me, not as a barista, not as the woman who added spice to his cup, but as someone who could steady him when the world grew heavy. A few days later, he invited me to his apartment. It was sleek, modern, with huge windows and minimalist furniture. But beneath its perfection, I sensed a quiet loneliness. You live here alone? I asked. Yes. Sometimes it feels like even the walls are too loud with silence. Looking around, I realized how much warmth was missing from his life. That night, we cooked dinner together, simple pasta with sauce. He laughed when I spilled tomato on the counter. With you, even mistakes feel good, he said. For the first time, I stayed at his place. We talked late into the night, about our childhoods, our dreams, the little things that had shaped us. By the time dawn came, I knew I wasn't just letting him into my heart. I was letting him into my world. Our days intertwined more and more. Jake came not only for morning coffee but often in the evenings, helping me close the café. Together, we experimented with flavors, creating new recipes. He joked about us starting a Sara and Jake signature menu. Imagine it, he laughed. An architect and a barista, turning into a culinary duo. That sounds like the plot of a movie, I teased. Sometimes we stayed after closing, with soft music playing in the background. I brewed coffee while he sketched quietly beside me. These simple evenings felt perfect. One night, he suddenly looked up from his drawings. Sara, I want you to know, you're more than an accident to me. You're part of my future. His voice was steady, certain. I understood, it wasn't just sweet words. It was a confession. My heart answered before my lips did, but I whispered back anyway. I want that too. We embraced in the warm glow of the lamps, with the scent of cinnamon hanging in the air. And I knew, our story was only beginning. Winter in New York is always magical. The streets glowed with garlands, the air smelled of hot chocolate and freshly baked cookies. My cafe was wrapped in the same festive atmosphere. I decorated the windows with fairy lights, hung wreaths, and placed candles on each table. Jake started helping on weekends. He climbed ladders to hang lights, laughing when I tried to adjust them from below. We looked like a true team. Can you imagine, he said while fixing the last star, this is the first Christmas I don't feel alone. His words pierced straight into my heart. I knew his life had been full of achievements but little closeness. Now, he was sharing warmth with me. On Christmas night, he showed up just as I was locking the door. In his hands was a small package. Inside was a soft scarf, the exact color of cinnamon. So you'll always remember how it all began, he said. I wrapped the scarf around me, kissed him, and realized, this was our Christmas, real and shared. Our story moved forward quickly. Outside, the city froze in winter's grip, but every day felt warmer with him. Jake introduced me to his colleagues. I introduced him to Laura, who immediately nicknamed him Mr. Cinnamon. One evening, he took me to the rooftop of a building he had designed. We climbed to the top, and there stretched the dazzling view of Manhattan, glowing with thousands of lights. I always imagined I'd share this view with someone, he said. I'm glad it's you. Wrapped in my cinnamon scarf, I thought about how a tiny accident, a pinch of spice in coffee, had led us here. His arm around my shoulders, the city beneath us, I felt my life finally finding harmony. One day Jake brought new blueprints to the cafe. He spread them on the counter. "Take a look," he said. I froze. The drawings showed a space that looked like an expanded version of my cafe, more tables, displays of pastries, and giant windows spilling sunlight inside. "Jake, this looks like us," he finished. "I want to build something together. Not just a cafe. A life." Tears stung my eyes. He wasn't joking. This wasn't just architecture. This was his vision of our shared future. I nodded silently, because in my heart I already knew, I was ready. Spring came fast. The city bloomed, and so did we. We opened a small terrace in front of the cafe. People came to sit in the sun, drink coffee, and laugh. Jake often worked beside me there, joking it was his office with the best barista in the world. One evening, after everyone left, we stayed alone on the terrace. The air was heavy with the scent of lilacs and coffee. He turned serious. "Sara, I've never been good at relationships. But with you, I don't want to complicate anything anymore. I just want to be with you. Always." He pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, delicate, with a honey-colored stone. "Will you marry me?" My hands trembled. Tears spilled before I could stop them. "Yes," I whispered. Around us the city roared, but for us the world had gone still. Our wedding was simple but full of love. We invited only close friends, decorated the cafe with flowers and candles. Laura cried through the ceremony, and Jake's colleagues teased that the architect finally built not just structures but a family. I walked toward him in a white dress, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon. It had been the symbol of our story, and now it marked the start of our new life. When I first came here, Jake said in his vows, I thought only of coffee. But I got more than I ever dreamed. I got you. Happiness overflowed in me. I knew, this man was my home. After the ceremony, we danced right there in the cafe. The lights glowed softly, rain painted patterns on the windows, and laughter filled the room. Every sip of coffee that night tasted sweeter than ever. Sometimes love doesn't appear when you search for it. It arrives by accident. In a pinch of cinnamon dropped into a black americano. And that accident became our forever.